Hi, I'm Ryan Dusick. I'm the founding drummer of Maroon 5, and I have a new book out called Harder to Breathe, which talks about my journey from losing that career, dealing with a decade of anxiety and depression and alcoholism, and then finding recovery and becoming a therapist and an advocate for mental health. So it's a whole new journey.
Oh, this love has taken its toll on me. She said goodbye too many times before.
So walking away from the band Maroon 5 was not my choice. We kind of painted it like it was my choice at the time that I walked away, the letter that we put out. I guess it was kind of the kind thing for them to do to allow me to kind of paint it in that way. But really, I would have kept playing if I could, but I physically couldn't. And the band had to make a decision to move on without me, even though I was the original drummer. I was one of the original 4 members that started the band in 1994. And I was in that band for over a decade. So walking away was absolutely devastating. It wasn't something that any of us really wanted, certainly not me. But they had, a whole career to think about, and I was really struggling. So they had to move on, and I had to figure out, what I was going to do with the rest of my life at that point, which was a really difficult question to answer. We started the band in my parents' garage in 1994 when I was 16 years old. And so, we were just idiot teenagers having a great time and dreaming about being rock stars. And it took us a decade, but we got there. And it was an incredible ride. I mean, it was just so exhilarating and fun along the way. A lot of inspiration, a lot of different turns before we finally got to that mountaintop. And it was the album Songs About Jane, when we changed the name to Maroon 5, that we finally had that success. But we had to earn it. It took us a few years on the road promoting that album to get to the point where we were headliners. And in the first 2 years alone, in 2002 and 2003, we played over 500 shows in those 2 years. And that's not including, the other stuff that we were doing, all the promotional stuff, going and doing in-store appearances and radio station acoustic performances and, photo shoots, video shoots, meet and greets, all the things that go into, promoting and really trying to step up to that next level. So by the time we were a headliner and we had a single that was on the charts and we were starting to make a name for ourselves, we were already pretty burnt out. Me in particular, I was kind of breaking down slowly over time. It wasn't something that happened in one show or in one tour. It was the combination of a lot of internal pressure that I put on myself. I had a kind of perfectionistic background and mindset, anxiety, and just the kind of obsessive thoughts that really made the daily grind even more difficult on me than it might have on others. And then you combine that with the external pressure of this incredibly intense, long, never-ending tour that we were on. And it just started to take a toll on me. First, physically, I was having pain in my shoulder, which went back to my pitching days in high school. I had an injury that got exacerbated by all that. But in retrospect, I'm able to see that it was the mental health aspect combined with the physical that really led to this breakdown, really, that happened. It was a sort of a nervous breakdown, which is not a clinical term, but it's kind of the way that I relate to it, because it was my nervous system just started, it just decided at a certain point that this was killing me and that I couldn't keep going this way. So I developed this thing called musician's dystonia, which is not a diagnosis that anyone was able to give me at the time. I went to every kind of doctor you can imagine, and nobody sort of had the big picture answer for what was going on. But it's been in my years of recovery that I've kind of figured out. It's a trauma response, really. My nervous system was telling me, this thing is killing you and you need to stop. And so it just kind of decided to stop allowing me to coordinate playing the drums. So on top of the physical pain and the exhaustion, now I was just having this nerve thing where my hands and then even my feet really just couldn't coordinate playing the drums the way that I used to.
This song is extremely new. We wrote it a few days ago.
Actually, we wrote it yesterday.
We wrote it yesterday. Yeah! the way she lives. It's everything she is.
Well, for the first year and a half, I think, after I stopped playing the drums, I was, at least in my mind, on a mission to come back, to be able to play the drums again and rejoin the band doing what we had worked for a decade to do, you know, to be the biggest band in the world, which we were becoming at that point. Unfortunately, it just wasn't working out. I went to every kind of doctor, I did every kind of therapy, and it just wasn't improving. It was actually getting worse. And so in the course of that, I was feeling really demoralized. I was feeling really beaten down, becoming more depressed. And that's when alcohol became a problem for me, because it was sort of the only way I knew how to escape the painful feelings. It was a way to sort of put on an alter ego for a night, pretend like I was still a rock star having a great time. But you know, that took its toll on me too. And when I had to officially walk away from the band, I kind of went down into a hole, because I didn't have that identity anymore. You know, the whole thing that had been self-defining, being the drummer in Maroon 5, was now gone, as was my connection to my best friends, who were, you know, the guys in the band and all the people that were around the band. It was my whole life. And so I really didn't know how to cope at that point, other than to just sort of push it all away, which became habit. And it became something that, after a couple of years of really kind of diving head first to the alcoholism, I convinced myself that I had it under control. You know, that I just had to moderate. I just had to kind of figure out how to live a normal life, or what felt like a normal life. But it was, as I talk about in my book, Harder to Breathe, it was really just the illusion of control. This feeling that, or this idea, really a rationalization, that if I could just drink moderately, if everyone could see from the outside that I was doing okay, then that meant I was doing okay on the inside, which of course is not always the case. So it went on this way for quite a while, until I really just, it got worse and worse, and it got to a point where I really hit a wall, and I was sort of a spiritual bottom. You know, we talk about hitting a bottom. For me, it was a spiritual bottom. It wasn't me ending up on the street or in jail or something like that, thankfully, and I'm very grateful for that. But it was just feeling more and more isolated, feeling disconnected from life, not feeling like I had any real purpose or meaning in my life, because I felt like I had that in being a part of Maroon 5 with my brothers. And then that was gone. And so I didn't know what kind of purpose or meaning I could have in my life at that point. But little did I know that once I found recovery, once I started sobriety and started walking back towards life, that new purpose and new meaning would present itself to me. I was actually in grad school getting my master's degree in clinical psychology when I started putting pen to paper, so to speak, or typing on my computer, this story that I had thought about writing actually maybe 10 years before, when I was in the depths of my struggles with alcoholism and depression and grief, the grief of the loss. I didn't do it at that time because I was in a bad place, and even though I knew I had some interesting stories to tell, I didn't really know what the purpose of it would be, because it was really just kind of a tragic, sad tale. Now fast forward to when I'm in grad school, and not only am I doing well in my own recovery from some of these things, and the anxiety was improving, of course I was sober, I was finding new inspiration and purpose in the work that I was doing or working towards. But I also realized, this was a story that now had a happy ending, and in my telling it, you might actually find some hope in recovery from the things that I struggled with. So not only did I have a story to tell, and did I want to write a book for my own reasons, but now I felt like I was on a mission, that I had something to give to the world, that I'd be selfish if I didn't put it out there. So it just became something that I almost felt like I needed to do. I felt a responsibility to do. I had given my background a platform to speak from, and now I had an education to speak about it, and I had this story to tell, which was now a hopeful one. So I figured I got to put it down on paper. I got to start writing this book and tell my story the best way I can, and really dive into this the only way I know how, which is all or nothing. But it was a really fulfilling process of writing the book. I mean, I enjoyed every aspect of it, and it was that meaning and purpose that I had been longing for and that I'd been lacking. And now, not only was I becoming a mental health professional, becoming a therapist, but I was now becoming an advocate, somebody who had a voice that could speak publicly about these things. And so, the book just started to write itself in my head, and I started really taking it on as the next part of my mission. The book definitely was another level of therapy for me. We studied in grad school something called narrative therapy. I kind of look at it as a form of narrative therapy because, we tell ourselves these narratives about our life. We look back on the things that might have been sad, that might have been tragic, and we might have a very negative spin on it. We might have, a positive outlook on how we grew from it. There's a lot of ways in which we look at our past and our present and our future that can either be helpful to us or harmful to us, depending on how we're telling ourselves that story. So writing this book, writing this narrative, and really poring over it and trying to find ways to process the sort of trauma of it, but also find the message in it, find the happy ending in it, and tell something in this story that's going to be helpful. That was really therapeutic for me. It was like ultimate closure on that chapter of my life. And it was also, I think, it was an outgrowth of a lot of the work that I was already doing, because early in recovery from alcoholism, I was in AA meetings, and I was volunteering at a recovery center where I was telling my story over and over again. And every time I would tell my story, it sounded a little bit different. The takeaway was a little bit different. I was getting better at sort of crafting the narrative in a way that was going to be helpful to the people that I was telling it to. So each time I did that, I realized that I was taking more and more from it. And then writing the book was just the sort of natural evolution of that, taking it to a further degree and telling it in more detail and with more emphasis on the things that I learned in the process. And so it became this really cathartic experience and process to put it into a narrative in that way, and to hopefully provide it to people that need to hear a story like this that might offer them some hope. I think for a long time, I kind of hid away from the old identity of being a member of Maroon 5. It was kind of a double-edged sword when it would come up in conversation. I was proud of what I had done and that I had been a part of that, but at the same time, it was so painful that I didn't really want to talk about it. And it was also a legacy that was really difficult to live up to. I was still working in music, I was still doing some producing, developing bands and writing music, but everything I was doing, I of course was comparing to not only what I had already done and that really special experience I had had in the chemistry of the band, but also comparing it to what they were still doing. At that point, they're on the biggest stages in the world playing sold out arenas and having hit after hit, which I was happy for them for a lot of reasons, but at the same time, of course, nothing I was doing could live up to that. So it was really difficult for me to feel that my old identity was not, in some ways, a hindrance on me embracing a new identity, because it felt like I had had my shot at real happiness and fulfillment, and I had gotten there and then lost it. So I didn't really know what to do with that, and it made everything that I was doing afterwards a real challenge. It took me a lot of work in recovery to realize that it was not my fault, or to at least forgive myself for the ways in which maybe I could have done things differently. Because for the longest time, part of what drove the depression and the alcoholism was this self-loathing, really. I hated myself for being a failure. I thought that I was defective in some way. I was telling myself that narrative. And that's what just kept me sinking lower and lower, was, that inner dialogue or monologue of just telling myself over and over that I had failed in some way and that had been my fault and nobody else's but mine. I was mad at the world, I was mad at the universe or God, or I had displaced anger towards, misplaced anger towards the band or other people. But really inside I was angry at myself. I was beating myself up for what I perceived to be, my fault in all, the way that it ended. In recovery, in the work that I've done in therapy, in sobriety, working the 12 steps, all the things that I've done that have been so helpful for my recovery, I've realized that, look, I had some issues that were predispositions for the things that happened. I wasn't even aware of them, really, until things got really bad. And at that point, there really wasn't a whole lot that I could do. It was just the intersection of a lot of different factors that were really challenging and led to this breakdown. And once I broke down, it took a long time for me to really find a way out of that. So you really, you live and you learn, and I have grown so much from the experience, not just of going through the pain, but finding another side to it and finding recovery and finding new purpose in recovery. And now I recognize, maybe, I don't know, I hesitate to say it all happened for a reason. I don't know if I'm one of those people who believes in fate in that way, but I do believe that some of the things that I'm doing today, I never would have known that was within me unless I had to go through all that to get to this. And now some of the things I'm doing are so fulfilling in ways that I hadn't had anticipated. And it adds an element of altruism and of giving of myself, of being of service, that just being a drummer in a rock band wouldn't have allowed me to do. So I have to look back and see, there were things that I lost, and there are things that were very painful, but there was a lot that was gained in the process, and so I have to have gratitude at this point. I've been doing so many things in my life that are so fulfilling and so exciting on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. More and more new and exciting adventures await for me. I've been doing speaking engagements as well as working with clients. I've been doing a lot of writing. I've been traveling around a little bit more again and doing some of these things, and fantasizing about what the next adventure will be. But the drums are always a part of me, and music is always a part of me. It's a complicated part of me at this point. It's a love-hate relationship. And when I see the drums, it's both, it's a complicated thing that happens. I get excited when I see a drum set. It's still that 12-year-old inside of me who got, you can see probably right now I'm lighting up just talking about it. I remember wanting a drum set so bad when I was 12 years old and waking up Christmas morning and there it was. And so, I think that'll always be the case. I'll always see drums and I'll always be excited. But then there will always be that anxiety that comes with it, that comes from the trauma of everything that happened. So, I'm working on trying to reestablish that relationship where it's just joyful and it's just exciting and it's not painful. But it's a long, slow process. And I've been seeking out, any ways in which I can process that trauma in ways that I haven't already. I've done all the talk therapy that you can possibly imagine. I've told my story a million times. I've done a lot of meditation. I'm a big advocate for mindfulness, both as a meditation and as a philosophy. But I'm learning more and more that the somatic elements of recovery are so important, specifically for trauma. And I've met a few different drummers who have had similar experiences as me that have given me some good advice. And if it were as simple as sitting down and just practicing, I'd be doing that every day. But it's not as simple as that. There's trauma that lives in the lowest parts of your brain, in your unconscious, and in your nervous system below consciousness. And that stuff, no matter how much you practice, it's not really going to go away unless you've done some of the somatic work that some people that are specialized in trauma are really just starting to find specialization in ways that we never have before. So there's all these exciting new ways to work through trauma that I'm learning about, even as a clinician, let alone as a drummer trying to reestablish a healthy relationship with the drums. And I'm just walking down all those avenues and seeing what awaits me when I walk down. I'm going actually right after this interview to an appointment that I have with a somatic experiencing therapist, which is a relatively new form of therapy. And it's foreign to me as somebody who likes to talk a lot, somebody who always has a story or something that's a way to sort of intellectualize or cognitively work through whatever's going on inside of me. This is a form of therapy that you don't really need that. And I have to check myself and say, my stories are no good here because the stories live in my body. When it comes to trauma, the body keeps the score. That's a phrase we use a lot. So, I'm putting my trauma in the hands of people that know more than I do in that regard, in terms of the somatic methods. And I'm hoping for the best because I've seen other people that have overcome things similar to what I've dealt with and much, much worse. People who have, I can't compare my trauma to the things that some people have lived through. I have actually for a long time had a hard time referring to the things that I went through as trauma because it didn't seem so terrible. I would talk about it. It's like, oh, woe is me. I'm this, rock star who couldn't hack it anymore. How is that trauma when people have been in war zones, and dealt with childhood abuse and things that are, life and death situations. But I've come to understand that trauma is relative to context. It's relative to the individual. There's sort of this, there's big T trauma, uppercase trauma, and there's lowercase trauma. The smaller T for things that are that we all go through. They shape the people that we are. They shape the way that we relate to the world and the ways that we relate to ourselves. And so those things can change things in our lives. And sometimes it's hard to change away from those things that are deeply rooted in our relationship with ourselves. So it takes a special kind of work to work through it. And so I'm just trying to walk the walk as much as I talk the talk at this point in my life. And if there's something that's presented to me that's something I haven't explored, I try to have as much as I can be stubborn, I try to have an open mind in all the ways that it's been helpful for me so far. I've definitely thought about writing another book. It's probably something that will happen at some point. When I wrote this book, I thought, well, you can only write your life story once, right? There's no sequel coming. But actually, I've gotten some good advice that that's not necessarily true, because this is the sort of overview. This is the narrative, but there's so many themes in the context of that narrative that you could pull out and you could do a whole book just on that theme. So I think that there's a possibility that there is a part 2 or 3 or 4. I don't know exactly what it would be yet. But I also, there's a lot in the area of mental health, or in addiction and recovery, or in music and creativity. There's a lot of different areas in which I've had a lot of experience that I could see myself writing more about. I have been writing a column in Variety magazine about mental health and the music industry. I've written a few articles so far for that. So that's just, an idea of some of the things that I might be doing. But I don't know, I'm a creative person. Being in the field of service that I'm doing now, one of the things that's become clear to me is that I love to express myself as much as I like to help others. Being a creative person, I could see myself working in a lot of different media. And so I don't know exactly what that'll look like in the future. I just know that writing this book was really a process that I enjoyed as much as anything I've done since I left the band. Making songs about Jane was such an incredible experience that I look back on that with such gratitude for having been a part of it, that I just want to continue to sort of challenge myself with things like this book, Harder to Breathe, or who knows what will come next that might be the next inspiration and really fulfilling process. You should definitely check out my website, ryandusick.com, where I try to keep everything up to date with what I'm doing, both as a therapist and coach and as an author and speaker. On Instagram, you can find me at Ryan Michael Dusick, at Ryan_Michael_Dusick. That's where I keep everything up to date on a daily basis, and I post old photos and videos of my time in the band, as well as stuff that I'm doing now, like speaking engagements and appearances and things, interviews like this. So it's a fun place to check out all the things that I've been doing. Hi, my name is Ryan Dusick, and you've just been buzzed.